She was standing at the Delta check-in counter at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport at 6:17 a.m. on a Monday when Officer Darnell Briggs closed his hand around the collar of her uniform and pulled. The fabric at the right shoulder gave way, not all the way, not a clean tear, but a visible separation at the seam. A white thread opening like a line drawn by someone who had decided something without asking. 3 people in the check-in line saw it happen. A 4th was already recording on a phone. Officer Briggs said something about ID verification and unauthorized access to the ticketing area. And then he said the word ma'am in the way people say ma'am when they mean the opposite of respect. The woman did not stumble. She did not raise her voice. She stood exactly where she had been standing before his hand closed around her collar, and she turned to face him with the unhurried precision of someone who had been in situations where stillness was the only correct response, and had been in enough of them to know it in her body now, without thinking. Her name was Colonel Adaize Ifeoma Mensah. She was 47 years old, 143 pounds, and she had been wearing this uniform for 24 years. The uniform was Marine Corps dress blues, midnight blue jacket, red trouser stripe, gold buttons down the center that she had polished the night before at the Hampton Inn on Sullivan Road, using a cloth her mother had cut from an old flannel shirt in 1994, and that she had carried in her deployment bag to Fallujah, to Kandahar, to Djibouti, and to 22 other places most people could not find on a map. The rank insignia on her collar read 06. The ribbons on her left chest, 12 rows of them, each ribbon a record of something she had survived or been called to do, included the Navy Cross, the second highest military decoration the United States Marine Corps could award, given for extraordinary heroism in combat. It sat in the top row, above everything else, a small rectangle of blue and gold that represented a specific afternoon in Helmand Province in 2011, when she had pulled 4 Marines out of a burning vehicle under fire and carried the last one 180 meters to the medevac point with a fractured left tibia. Officer Briggs had not looked at the ribbons. He had looked at her face for approximately 3 seconds, and then he had reached for her collar. There were 11 people in the check-in queue at counter 14 in Terminal F. 9 of them watched. The 2 at the front of the line looked at the floor. The 4th witness, the one with the phone, was a man named Kolade Adeyemi Bright, who was 34 years old. A software engineer flying to Boston for a conference, who had been standing 3 places behind the colonel in the queue, and who had seen the officer approaching from the direction of the corridor and had reached for his phone, because he had learned, at 29 years old in a parking garage in Buckhead, that the only reliable thing you could do in the moment was make a record. He filmed 4 minutes and 11 seconds. Colonel Mensah had arrived at Terminal F at 5:54 a.m., 23 minutes ahead of the recommended check-in window for her 7:40 a.m. flight to Washington Dulles. She was flying to attend the annual ceremony at the Marine Barracks Washington on 8th and I Street, the oldest post in the Marine Corps, where she was scheduled to deliver the keynote address at a memorial for the 41 Marines of her battalion who had not come home from Helmand. She had written the address over 3 weeks. It was in the document sleeve of her carry-on. She had read it twice on the shuttle from the hotel and changed 2 sentences. She had been in uniform because military members traveling on official orders travel in uniform. This was not a choice. It was a regulation. The regulation was printed in Muradmin 40516, which had been in effect for 9 years. She stepped into the check-in queue at 5:56 a.m. and waited. At 6:09 a.m., an airport employee named Terry had processed the 2 passengers ahead of her and had been replaced at the counter by a second employee who was still logging into the system when the colonel reached the desk. At 6:13 a.m., a supervisor named Mr. Doka had come to the counter to troubleshoot something on the terminal screen and had asked the colonel to step aside while he worked. She had stepped aside. At 6:16 a.m., Mr. Doka had returned to the back office, and the second employee had waved the colonel forward again. At 6:17 a.m., Officer Briggs had arrived. He was 31 years old, 4 years on the job, broad-shouldered, with a name tag he wore slightly crooked on his left breast pocket, and the look of a person who used the speed of his decisions as evidence of their accuracy. He had come from the direction of the Terminal F corridor. He would say later, in the airport security incident report, that he had received a radio alert about an individual in the ticketing area who was not complying with standard check-in procedures. He had not specified what the non-compliance was. The form for the incident report, like many such forms, did not require him to. He told the colonel she needed to come with him. She asked why. He said there had been a complaint. She said she was checking in for a flight departing in 83 minutes and asked him to describe the nature of the complaint. He reached for her collar. The seam at the right shoulder of the dress blues jacket gave way, a thread width of white against the midnight blue. And Officer Briggs said, "I'm going to need you to stop resisting," though she had not moved. She looked at him. "Officer," she said, "your hand is on a United States Marine Corps dress uniform. You will remove it." Her voice was exactly the same volume as it had been before he touched her. That was the thing Kolade Adeyemi Bright would describe later, in the comment he posted under the video, in the message he sent to his mother that evening, in the testimony he gave to the airport's Civilian Oversight Board 6 weeks later. Not that she was loud, not that she was angry, but that her voice did not change at all. That it carried the specific quality of something that had already decided what it was and did not need the situation to confirm it. Briggs removed his hand. He did not step back. He said, again, that she needed to come with him. She said, "I will provide my identification at this counter, complete my check-in, and then speak with your supervisor in whatever capacity you require. I will not leave this queue." She turned back to the check-in agent. The check-in agent was 23 years old, and her name tag read Precious. She had been on this shift for 47 minutes. She had processed 19 passengers before the colonel, and she had a system. Scan the document, confirm the identity, tag the bags if there were bags to tag, print the boarding pass, wish the passenger well. And the system had worked 19 times in a row, and she had trusted it. And now, the system was standing in front of something the system had not accounted for, and Precious was looking at the colonel's ID, and then at Officer Briggs, and then at the colonel's ID again, with the expression of someone doing arithmetic that kept producing the wrong answer. The terminal at 6:18 a.m. had a particular quality of sound. The cleaning crew had finished their last pass 20 minutes ago, and the foot traffic was still thin enough that the ambient noise of the building was audible. The low hum of the baggage belt behind the counter, the ventilation system in the ceiling, the squeak of a cartwheel somewhere in the corridor, the sound of a departure announcement playing in a frequency that was designed to carry across hundreds of feet of concourse, and that therefore landed in the check-in area with a slight hollow resonance, like an announcement being made inside a drum. The fluorescent overheads had a warmth that the building architects had specified to feel welcoming, and that instead felt, at this hour, like the light inside a waiting room. Outside the terminal windows, the tarmac was still partly dark. A single ground crew vehicle moving slowly across the apron with its amber safety light turning. Precious printed the boarding pass and held it out with both hands the way she had been trained to offer documents to military personnel. It was in the training manual. She had read it once during orientation 8 months ago. The colonel took the boarding pass. Officer Briggs told her a 4th time that she needed to come with him. She turned to face him. Her left hand was at her side. Her right hand held the boarding pass, and her ID flat against her palm. She stood with the specific stillness of someone who had been in situations where the wrong movement changed everything, and who had learned, in those situations, to be very precise about what a movement was and what it meant. "I have done nothing that requires me to leave this counter," she said. "If you have a specific charge, state it. If you have a specific policy I have violated, cite it by number. If you have neither of those things, then we are done with this conversation." The 3 people nearest in the queue had stepped back, not because they were told to, but because something in the quality of what was happening made the body want distance from it. The 4th one, Kolade, had not stepped back. His phone was still recording. His hand was steady. Briggs called for backup on his radio. If this story is landing somewhere specific in your body right now, stay with it. Because what happens next begins not with Briggs's backup arriving, but with a woman named Nana who has worked the 5 a.m. to 2 p.m. shift at the Delta Sky Club Lounge at Terminal F since 2013. And who knows more about what happens in this terminal before most people wake up than anyone has ever asked her to write down. Nana Owusu was 61 years old, small, with silver at her temples, and hands that moved around the breakfast station the way hands move when they have made peace with a particular rhythm. She was originally from Kumasi, had come to Atlanta in 1989 with her husband and 2 daughters, had buried her husband in 2004, had raised the daughters alone, had worked this terminal through every iteration of its renovation and every shift in its security culture, and every version of its incident report form. She watched the terminal the way a person watches something they love and have complicated feelings about, completely and without illusion. She had seen the colonel come through at 5:54 a.m. She noticed her the way she noticed everyone who wore something that cost them something to wear. Not money, but history. She saw the ribbons. She saw the Navy Cross at the top of the row. She knew what the Navy Cross was because her nephew had tried to earn one in 2009 and had come home before he had the chance to try, in a way that meant he would never try for anything again. She had watched Briggs cross the terminal floor. When the backup arrived, 2 more officers, both younger than Briggs, both with the same crooked urgency, Nana set down the serving spoon she was holding, removed her apron, and walked out of the Sky Club to the check-in area at Counter 14. She was not supposed to leave during service hours. She left anyway. She stood near the check-in desk, not between the officers and the colonel, but visible. Witness visible. The kind of visible that changes what a room is willing to do. The second and third officers looked at her. She looked back. She said nothing. She stayed. For 12 minutes, the counter at Terminal F check-in ran its ordinary business around an extraordinary stillness at its center. The queue behind the colonel had reorganized itself into the adjacent counters, the way a stream reorganizes around a stone, as though the people in the line had not made a decision to move, but had simply found themselves moved. The check-in agents at counters 13 and 16 had seen the backup officers arrive and had looked at each other over the heads of their customers and had looked away and continued processing documents. The terminal supervisor, a man named Wade who covered the 5 a.m. to 1 p.m. shift on Mondays and Wednesdays, had been called by radio at 6:21 a.m. and had said he was on his way and had not yet appeared. There was a clock above the exit to the security checkpoint at 6:26 a.m. It read 6:26 a.m. The colonel stood. She was not holding anything with tension. Her shoulders were level. The seam at the right shoulder of the dress blues jacket had a thread width of white at its edge. Small, precise, the kind of damage that announces itself quietly rather than dramatically. The kind that is harder to look at than a larger tear, because it requires you to look closely, and when you look closely, you cannot pretend you didn't. Precious had printed the boarding pass 8 minutes ago. It was still in the colonel's right hand. One of the backup officers, the younger of the 2, whose name tag read Cole, and who had been on the job for 19 months, looked at the ribbons. He looked at them in the way a person looks at something they recognize, but cannot immediately place. The way you look at a face you know from somewhere you cannot name. He had been to a Veterans Day assembly at his son's school in November. He had seen an image of a Navy Cross in the program. He had not known at the time what it was for. He looked at the ribbon in the top row of the colonel's chest, the blue and gold rectangle, and something in his face made the very slight movement of a person rearranging a conclusion. He did not say anything yet, but he stopped moving toward her. Then Briggs told the colonel a 5th time that she needed to come with him. And his voice had the particular quality of a person who is committed to a course of action and cannot find the exit. And something about the 5th time, the number itself, The fact that the same request had been refused 5 times by the same still person in the same still voice made even Briggs go quiet for a half-second before he spoke again. The colonel had completed her check-in. The colonel had completed her check-in. The agent had printed her boarding pass. The colonel's name on the boarding pass was COLA. Mensa, USMC, and beneath it, in a smaller font, the ticketing code that marked her as military personnel on official travel orders. Briggs had not read the boarding pass. He told the colonel a 4th time that she needed to accompany him. She said, "I have identified myself. I have completed check-in. I am now going to ask you to contact your supervisor because I am going to file an incident report, and I want to make sure there is someone present who understands what that report will contain." Briggs said he was the one who decided who filed incident reports in this terminal. The colonel looked at him for 2 seconds. "No," she said. "You're not." She picked up her carry-on. The document sleeve was still visible through the mesh side pocket, the folded speech, the 41 names, the 2 sentences she had changed on the shuttle. She turned toward the security line. Briggs moved to intercept her. It was 6:28 a.m. when a man in a civilian suit came through the door, at the far end of the terminal, at a pace that was not running, but was faster than anything else moving in the building. He was 54 years old, with the specific kind of stillness that comes from spending years in rooms where stillness meant the difference between good outcomes and worse ones. His name was Major General Tobena Nwosu, United States Marine Corps, retired, currently serving as Deputy Director of Veterans Affairs for the Southeast region, and he had been in the Sky Club at the top of the escalator when Nana had sent him a text message at 6:19 a.m. That said 2 words, counter 14. He had seen the colonel's flight itinerary in the ceremony program. He had been booked on the same flight. He had not known she was in the terminal until Nana's message. He walked to counter 14. He did not raise his voice. He did not speak to Officer Briggs first. He looked at the colonel. "Mensa," he said. "Sir," she said. He turned to Briggs. He looked at him with the patience of someone who had been doing a very specific job for 30 years and who recognized, in the first half-second of looking, exactly what kind of incident he was standing inside. "You have your hand near a United States Marine Corps officer who is traveling on official orders," he said. "I want you to look at the ribbons on her chest before you say another word." Briggs looked at the ribbons. He looked for a long time. He had been a security officer for 4 years. He had passed his airport authority certification on the first attempt. He had completed 12 hours of de-escalation training. He had never been told, in any of that training, what the Navy Cross looked like, or what it meant, or that the person wearing it might be standing in his terminal at 6:17 a.m. on a Monday trying to board a flight to Washington to read 41 names out loud in front of the people who had known and loved them. The form had not contained a field for any of that. "I'm going to need to speak with your watch commander," General Nwosu said. "Right now. And I am going to need someone to contact the terminal manager about the damage to this officer's uniform, because that damage is evidence, and it needs to be documented before anyone in this building makes another decision." Briggs's hand dropped to his side. He reached for his radio. By 7:15 a.m., the watch commander had arrived. By 7:22 a.m., the terminal manager had arrived. By 7:29 a.m., the airport's legal counsel had been reached by phone. The colonel's flight was held for 11 minutes, a procedural accommodation that the gate agents made with the quiet efficiency of people who understood that something had gone wrong, and that the wrong thing had a name, and the name was now on a boarding pass at their counter. The video Kalade Adeyemi Bright had filmed was online by 9:30 a.m. It showed Officer Briggs's hand on the collar. It showed the seam opening. It showed the colonel's face, still, unafraid, looking at him with the expression of someone who had already survived something considerably worse than this, multiple times, and who was now simply waiting for the situation to understand what it had done. The video reached 4.1 million views before midnight. The airport authority opened a formal review the same day. The Muradmin regulation, which had been in the airport security training materials since 2018, but had never been incorporated into the standard identification protocol, was added to mandatory annual recertification for all 4,100 security officers at Hartsfield-Jackson within 60 days. Briggs was suspended pending the review and completed a program developed in consultation with the Department of Defense, the first such program of its kind at a major American airport, that specifically covered military identification, rank insignia, and the legal framework governing military personnel on official travel. He returned to duty. He requested the posting that was farthest from Terminal F. He was assigned to Terminal T. The woman who had filed the original complaint, the one that had brought Briggs to Counter 14 in the first place, was a 43-year-old white woman named Cynthia from the line behind the colonel, who had told an airport employee at 6:11 a.m. that there was a woman at the check-in counter causing a scene and refusing to comply. The colonel had, at that point, been standing silently in the queue for 15 minutes. Cynthia told the Civilian Oversight Board that she had seen the uniform but had not believed it was real. She could not explain, when asked directly, what she meant by real. The board asked her if she would have made the call if the woman in the uniform had been white. She said that was not a fair question. The board wrote in their report that the inability to answer that question was itself an answer, and the answer was an answer the airport's training protocols had been producing for years without knowing it. Nana did not testify at the board hearing. She sent a written statement. It was 4 paragraphs. The last paragraph read, "In its entirety, I have worked in this terminal for 11 years. I have seen this same thing happen 7 times that I can remember clearly, and I cannot tell you how many times I cannot remember clearly. Each time, I have thought about saying something. This time, I walked out. I am 61 years old, and I have decided that walking out is the correct response, and I do not intend to stop." The board entered the statement into the formal record. The colonel delivered her address at the Marine Barracks, Washington, at 11 a.m. on that Monday morning. The 2 sentences she had changed on the shuttle were in the 3rd paragraph, and they were about the specific quality of dignity that a uniform represents, not the rank, not the institution, not the authority that rank confers, but the accumulated weight of every decision the person wearing it had made before they put it on. She did not mention the airport. She did not mention the seam. She read all 41 names in the order they had died. Slowly, pausing between each one long enough for the name to complete itself in the air. The torn seam at the right shoulder of her dress blues jacket has not been repaired. She keeps the jacket in the garment bag she uses for ceremonial travel. The white thread at the shoulder is visible only if you know to look for it. She knows to look for it. She looks at it the same way her mother taught her to look at the things that had been done to her, directly, without flinching. Not because looking makes the doing acceptable, but because looking is the only honest response to what is true. What Officer Briggs saw at 6:17 a.m. was a black woman in a uniform at a check-in counter at an hour before most people are awake, and he made a decision in 3 seconds that would take the airport's Civilian Oversight Board 6 weeks and 200 pages to fully account for. What he could not see, what the form with its blank complaint field had no mechanism to capture, was Helmand Province in 2011, and 4 Marines in a burning vehicle, and 180 meters with a fractured tibia, and 24 years of a specific kind of service that asks the person performing it to believe, repeatedly and against significant evidence, that the country they serve will eventually see them clearly. You cannot take that from a person by reaching for their collar. You cannot diminish it by opening a seam. Some things are not in the uniform. They are in the person who earned the right to wear it. And the person who earned it carries it past every check-in counter, past every hand that reaches without asking, past every form that has no box for what is actually standing in front of it. The world will sometimes look at what you have built and refuse to see it. That is not a statement about what you built. It is a statement about how long the world takes to look at things clearly and how much it costs the people who were already clear long before the world got there. The ones who have to prove themselves in every room they enter are often the ones who built everything worth proving. And the rooms do not get to decide their worth. The rooms just get to be wrong for as long as the people inside them choose to be. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. I want to ask you something real before you go. If you had been one of the 9 people in that check-in queue who watched and said nothing, not who you want to be, but who you actually were at 6:17 a.m. on a Monday, tired, running on not enough sleep, with a flight to catch, what would have stopped you? What is the thing that keeps people quiet in a moment like that? And do you think it's possible to change that thing before the next time? Leave your answer in the comments. I want to read it. I'll see you in the next one.